I was making coffee in my Seattle apartment when my phone buzzed. A short text from my mother lit up the screen. "This year, just your sister's family." No explanation, no invitation, not even a pause. I stood there for a second, the steam from the mug brushing my face, and typed back one word that tasted sharper than it looked: enjoy. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I owned a $2 million estate tucked deep in the quiet woods of Vermont, and that this time I wasn't going to spend the holiday waiting for a seat at their table. My name is Anna, and for most of my 33 years, I've carried myself the way my family taught me to: quiet, capable, never needing anything. People say I have a calm presence, that I look put together in every room I walk into. What they don't see is how much of that came from learning very early that the louder someone else was, the smaller I had to become. I grew up in a tidy suburban neighborhood just outside Seattle, the kind of place where everyone waved from their driveways, and my mother kept the front porch spotless, as if it proved something. Inside that house, roles were assigned long before I understood what they meant. My mother, Linda, adored my younger brother, Brandon. She didn't deny it. She didn't have to. It lived in the way her voice softened around him and sharpened with me. My father, Warren, wasn't cruel, just steady in a way that never bent in my direction. He praised hard work, but somehow my work never counted. I remember being 8 years old, cleaning the kitchen after dinner while Mom rushed Brandon to football practice. I remember bringing his missed assignments to school when he got suspended for fighting. I remember calling for help the night I found him collapsed and shaking from something he never should have touched. I can still hear Mom's voice trembling, angry, asking me why I made everything worse. Meanwhile, Brandon returned from rehab to a backyard full of balloons, neighbors, and a banner welcoming him home. When I got into a prestigious college at 17, Mom set banana bread on the counter and said, "It's quiet, just how you like it." I used to think that was normal, that if I worked hard enough, stayed calm enough, they'd eventually see me. But recognition in my family was a spotlight that moved only when Brandon moved. Years later, when I got engaged, that pattern played out again. Mom asked me to move the date because it overlapped with Brandon's birthday. And at the engagement party, he showed up 2 hours late, blasting loud music, dragging all attention with him like a magnet. I remember the look on my fiancé's face, confused, disappointed. He didn't last long after that. Neither did the version of me who kept insisting everything was fine. Thanksgiving last year was the final hint I refused to accept. I brought someone new, Julian, a general history teacher who asked about my dreams more than my schedule. Mom seated us at a side table for convenience, even though there were empty chairs at the main one. When I shared that I'd bought my first home, Dad nodded vaguely and immediately asked Brandon about his podcast plans instead. It was the moment Julian looked at me as if to say, "You don't deserve this," and I realized he was right. But the truth is, patterns don't break until something snaps hard enough. And this year, that snap arrived in the form of a text message telling me Thanksgiving belonged to my sister's family. A sister I don't even have, just an easier way for Mom to write, "not you." I reread Mom's text 3 times before setting my phone down. The words didn't hurt the way they used to. They landed with a dull clarity, like something I'd seen coming for years, but only now recognized for what it really was. A line drawn without hesitation. A door closed without apology. I thought back to the Thanksgiving before the one with Julian. We'd arrived early, holding 2 bottles of wine he'd saved for weeks. Mom greeted him with a polite smile and pointed us to a side table near the window. "The main table's already arranged," she said, even though 2 chairs sat visibly empty. I remember Julian leaning closer, whispering, "Why does it feel like we're guests at someone else's event?" I didn't answer because admitting it out loud meant admitting how normal it had become. Later that night, when I mentioned the house I'd just bought, a quiet 3-bedroom near the park, Dad nodded but immediately turned to Brandon, asking how his podcast equipment fund was going. "We'll figure it out," he said warmly, as if I hadn't spoken at all. I felt Julian's hand tense on the back of my chair. A few days after he told me he cared about me but couldn't watch me keep shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort. He left a note on my counter and walked out of my life as gently as he'd walked in. I told myself I'd learned something from that I'd stopped chasing permission. But habits built young cling like damp cloth. I still called home every week, still asked if Brandon was doing okay, still swallowed the sting each time they ended the call with "Don't forget to wish him a happy birthday." So when Mom sent that message, "This year, just your sister's family," I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even ask why. I just stood in my kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint Seattle rain against the window, and felt something subtle unspool inside me. The version of me who always understood, always adjusted, always made room, quietly stepped aside. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. I stepped out onto my balcony, mug in hand, watching thin Seattle rain drift sideways across the sky. The phone lay face down on the counter behind me. I didn't need to look at it again. Those 11 words had already done their job. They had finally cleanly separated what I'd feared losing from what had never truly been mine. For a long moment, I just breathed. Then I walked back inside, opened my laptop, and typed a familiar phrase into the search bar: Property Papers, Haven House. The file came up instantly. My name, my signature, my grandfather Harold's steady handwriting on the transfer documents. A $2 million estate sitting in the quiet woods of Vermont, wrapped in pine trees and early snow, legally and irrevocably mine. They never asked about it. They never noticed the annual taxes I paid, never asked why I disappeared for weekends in winter, never wondered what kept drawing me back to a place so far from Seattle. To them, it was just Grandpa's old cabin. To me, it was the only place I'd ever felt unmistakably seen. I stared at the map for a long time. Tiny Blue Lake winding road, the long rectangle of the house tucked behind a tree line. And then the thought came steady and whole. I don't need their table. I can build my own. I opened a blank document and typed guest list. The first name was Aunt Helen. She'd always pulled me into tight hugs at family gatherings, whispering, "You okay, honey?" even when no one else noticed anything was wrong. Her reply came within minutes. "Tell me the date. I'm already packing." Next was Ethan, my cousin. We hardly talked these days, but when Brandon had one of his meltdowns years ago, Ethan was the only person who muttered, "I'm sorry. You always have to fix everything." When I called, he laughed softly and said Thanksgiving without the drama, count me in. Then Monica, my anchor, my friend who showed up with tea and blankets the night Julian left. When I sent the invitation, she didn't ask a single question. She just replied with a screenshot of her booked flight, choosing joy this year. Finally, I hesitated over one named Ellie, my 8-year-old niece, Brandon's daughter, the only child who ever looked at me like I was more than the family fixer. I typed a simple message to her mother, Amanda, not expecting much. Amanda called within the hour. "Ellie read your message," she said, voice soft. She cried happy tears. She wants to go. And if it's okay, I'd like to come too. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of that settle into my chest. "Of course," I said. "There's room for both of you." That night, I packed a suitcase and booked a flight to Vermont. For years, I'd waited for someone to save me a seat. This time, I was building the whole table myself. I arrived at Haven House 3 days before Thanksgiving, dragging 2 suitcases up the stone steps as the cold Vermont air stung my cheeks. The house looked exactly as it had in every memory, its pine-lined path, its weathered porch, its quiet dignity. For a moment, I just stood there listening to the wind ripple through the trees, feeling something inside me finally settle. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and winter dust. I lit a fire in the stone hearth, watched the flames catch, and let the warmth reach the places that had felt frozen for years. This house had always held me gently, even when no one else did. The next morning, I began preparing. I cleared the guest room, swept the porch, and laid a white cloth across the long dining table facing the windows. One table only. No side seating. No hierarchy. Everyone would belong equally. That thought alone steadied me. By afternoon, tires crunched over the gravel driveway. Aunt Helen stepped out with a pie tin and a wide scarf blowing behind her. "Sweet girl," she said, pulling me close, "your grandpa would be so proud." Her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan arrived next with wine and a bag of dried flowers. "Thought you might want these," he said with a shy, almost apologetic smile. It felt like a wordless acknowledgement of everything he'd seen and everything he hadn't said. Monica's flight was delayed, but she burst through the door at sunset like a gust of energy. "I brought cheese. Zero idea what it pairs with. We'll wing it." I laughed harder than I had in months. By nightfall, Haven House felt lived in again, coats hanging on chairs, murmured conversations drifting through the rooms, the low hum of people who cared simply because they chose to. It was a warmth I hadn't known how to allow myself before. The next morning, as I sliced apples in the kitchen, I heard small footsteps behind me. Aunt Anna Ellie stood there in her puffy jacket holding a crayon drawing of the house. Amanda followed her in cautious but kind. "You really made it," I said, kneeling. Ellie hugged me tightly. "Mom said we could come because you're making a real Thanksgiving." Amanda gave a soft, tired smile. She's blunt, but she's right. I showed them the attic room with the round window and the wool blankets my grandfather saved for winter storms. Ellie gasped at the view. "It looks like a snow globe." Exactly what he used to say. As we walked back down the stairs, headlights swept across the front windows. I frowned. Everyone I invited was already here. The car door opened and there he was. Dean, tall, steady, wearing a dark coat and holding a folded piece of paper. My breath caught. "I didn't send you an invite," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, handing me the paper. Inside was a child's handwriting, "Uncle Dean come to Vermont. Aunt Anna needs someone who stays." "She wrote this," I whispered. He nodded. "When an 8-year-old tells you someone needs you, you don't ignore it." I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, the warmth of the house swallowing the cold from his clothes. No one questioned his presence. They simply made room. A small miracle in itself. Thanksgiving morning looked like something from a movie, snow drifting in lazy circles, the lake half frozen, the house alive with laughter. Monica danced between the stove and counter with jazz music playing. Ethan and Ellie folded napkins into swans. Aunt Helen hovered over the oven as if guarding gold. Even Amanda laughed, really laughed at something Monica said about airline pretzels. Dean sat by the fire carving a small piece of wood, looking up now and then as if checking whether I still needed support. By early afternoon, the house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, brown butter, comfort made visible. For the first time in years, I felt full before the meal even began. We took a group photo by the big window. Ellie slipped her hand into mine at the last second. Someone posted the photo in a group thread with a few distant relatives. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then again. The calls wouldn't stop. I didn't need to check the screen. I knew exactly who it was. Mom, Dad, probably even Brandon. They'd seen the photo. They knew everyone else was here. They recognized Haven House. And they weren't in it. Monica raised an eyebrow. "Answer it. You've earned this moment." My hand didn't shake as I hit speaker. Linda's voice burst through instantly. "Anna." "What is going on? Why is everyone in Vermont? Whose house is that?" I leaned against the counter. "It's mine." A long, stunned silence. Then Dad. "Don't be ridiculous. It's the family estate." "It was," I corrected. "Grandpa signed it over to me. Years ago." Mom's voice sharpened. "So you excluded us. After everything we've done." "You excluded me first," I said calmly. "Your text made that pretty clear." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. I continued, voice steady. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm choosing myself. For once." Dean rose from his seat, walked to my side, and gently touched my shoulder. Then he took the phone from my hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed," he said evenly. "Anna is with people who choose her. If that bothers you, maybe think about why." Neither of my parents had an answer. Just breathing, the kind that carries years of entitlement cracking. Finally, Dad muttered, "We're driving up." "Then drive safe," I said, and ended the call. For a moment, the room stayed quiet. Then Ethan let out a low whistle. That was something. Aunt Helen cupped my cheek with a proud, trembling hand. "About time, sweetheart." Ellie tugged my sleeve. "Are you okay?" I kneeled to meet her eyes. "Yes," I said softly. For the first time, I really am. Dinner that night felt like a holiday built from the ground up, warm, chosen free. The turkey was carved imperfectly. The mashed potatoes were lumpy. Someone spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth. But the laughter was real, the peace honest. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for someone else's disappointment. The table was full, and it was mine. The next morning, snow covered the front steps in a thin white layer. I was helping Ellie draw a wreath design for the door when a long, sharp ring echoed through the house. Monica peeked out the window, then looked back at me. "They're here." I stood smoothing my sweater and opened the front door. My parents stood on the porch, coats buttoned to their chins, faces, pale eyes scanning everything behind me as if searching for the version of me they still expected to control. Anna, my mother, said tightly, "We need to talk. Privately." I led them into my grandfather's study where the afternoon light fell across the old desk. The room felt like a witness. "You blindsided us," my father started. "No," I said calmly, opening a folder and placing the property papers on the desk. I stopped pretending. I told them everything I had swallowed for 30 years, every dismissal, every shifted spotlight, every moment I'd been asked to step aside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply put truth on the table and let it sit there. For once, they had nothing to lean on, just silence, and the realization that the boundaries were real now. That evening, after the confrontation settled into the quiet corners of the house, we gathered around the long table, my chosen family, the people who showed up. Ellie placed her crayon drawing in the center, all of us standing in front of Haven House smiling. No hierarchy, no missing chairs. As I looked around, I felt something loosen in my chest, something old finally leaving. I wasn't reclaiming a seat at their table. I was building my own. If you've ever had to draw your own boundary or choose peace over permission, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and subscribe if you want more stories like this, stories about rising, choosing, and becoming whole again.